minutes also. Minister, you're welcome to the House. Albeit that I see this as a futile exercise today. I get really concerned about these statements because they do sweet damn all for the people that are watching this. Or
sorry,
the people that have got
you know, the Minister is here in good faith at our request, so really could you just stick to the debate,
okay,
please?
Right. Let's talk about housing and the gross inequality that exists in this country. A couple of weeks ago we saw an advertisement or an article in the Irish Times about a house in Foxrock that was bought for 2.4 million and the purchasers have sought permission to demolish the house and rebuild a 5-bedroomed house on the site. That's what's going on amongst the wealthy in this country. They can afford to lash out 2.4 million for a house. I know the house well because it was my brother's, who's sadly deceased, but I know the house and I know the love and care that went into developing that house and building it, and to think it's to be razed to the ground to build another house just to get one extra bedroom, it's beyond me. Let's look at the situation with young couples. I personal experience of a young couple over 7 years spending €97,000 on rent. €97,000 on rent over 7 years. Where, Minister, are they to find a deposit? Where are they to manage to put aside a few bob to build or to purchase a house? My colleague spoke about Dublin-centric a few moments ago. The truth of the matter is there's a massive number of young people in this town who are working and living in the most appalling conditions because they simply cannot afford the rent and they will never be able to buy a house. I went through in detail with the young couple that I'm talking about now, their income and their finances, and they could well afford a 2-bedroomed or even 3-bedroomed apartment in some parts of Dublin at a lesser cost than the rent they're paying. There is something terribly wrong with that. There is something wrong with a situation where we are enhancing private ownership at the cost of ordinary working people. We have to find a way, even if it means the state coming up with something like they would provide the deposit and allow that young couple to repay the deposit to the state and to pay their mortgage at the same time. It would at least get them out of a rented apartment and make that apartment available. I brought up to the Minister for Defence some time ago there the number of married quarters there are in places like Craughwell in Dublin, in the Curragh, that could be brought back into use. And indeed I advised at that time that Clúid would be willing to refurbish the properties that were there, put families into them, and thereby release properties in places like Dublin, in places like the Curragh and Kildare, in places like Cork. I'm not sure about Limerick and Kilkenny or Donegal. But the truth is there's properties there that can be refurbished and brought back into service. Why has it not happened? It hasn't happened because we have a cross-departmental problem. Defence, you can't do anything about Defence. Defence have a policy position that they're not going to have married quarters. You have a housing agency willing to say, look, we'll take them off your hands, sell the whole lot to us for €1, we'll refurbish them, and what's more, we will make sure that as soldiers leave service, we will return those houses to soldiers and we'll move them on elsewhere. The situation with respect to, I call them the teachers, nurses and Gardaí. I was a soldier, my wife was a nurse when we got married. We hadn't tuppence to rub together, but we were able to buy a house. We were able to get a mortgage. It's just not possible now. Young professional people cannot buy a house. Now, you talk about the mix of social, affordable and private dwelling. I grew up in Galway City. In Galway City we had Shantala, we had Bohemore and we had Merview. They were all local authority areas. The finest of people grew up in those places. The finest of people who subsequently became qualified as either craftsmen or as fitters or as mechanics or as teachers or as doctors have fought hard to go back in and buy those properties to remain in the communities they grew up in. There is absolutely no sense in what's going on in parts of Dublin where one house was sold for $500,000 in order to accommodate one family, in order to ensure that we had a mix of social and affordable in what was a private estate. That's just beyond belief. I have a case not too far from me. I don't get involved in local politics, so I really don't. It's what people tell me. I don't hold clinics or anything like that. But I have a neighbour who told me she's renting a house in Sandyford in Dublin. It's been subsidised by the local authority, but the rent on it is, I think, $1,700 a month, right? That house was a local authority house. It was sold for 72 or 73,000 to the renters at that time. It was subsequently sold for 300,000, and then it was bought for close to 600,000. How have we let this happen? By the way, Minister, I'm not saying it's your government's fault. You know, you inherited a lot of this, so don't think for 1 minute I'm blaming Fine Gael or Labour or anybody else. I'm talking about a system that has been allowed to develop. And we really have to go back to the drawing board, and somebody has to take control of the people who make these provisions or who advise ministers on these things that bring in policy changes. There is no reason why you can't have local authority areas, providing you're willing to put in the services that are required. I remember my father, God be good to him, telling me about when they were building the Shantala estate, and the clerk of works on the estate, if a piece of timber arrived on site with a knot in it, he sent it back, because they were the finest built houses in Galway at the time. The same was true of Merview. I know the regeneration job that's going on in Moyross and Limerick. I have first-hand knowledge of people in Moyross and South Hill. Great communities destroyed by a few thugs. But that was a policing issue, it wasn't a housing issue. So the issues that have led to this desire for a mix of social affordable, you know, it is not necessarily being driven for commercial or for the benefit of families. It's been driven because the social housing system broke down because we didn't police them properly, we didn't put in. Moyross is a classic case in point. I know you've been there. There wasn't a shop within walking distance of Moyross when they built it. You know, it was a crazy, massive building site, but nothing put in, no supports, nothing. So from that point of view, it is a disgrace. I visited Dresden recently with the German Chamber of Commerce, and one of the things that I was absolutely amazed at was the housing cooperative system that there is in place over there. When East Germany joined the West, one of the issues they had in Dresden was a horrendous housing crisis. They started a housing cooperative. That cooperative, and I'd invite you to go out there, Minister, and look at it. That housing cooperative has now gone to the stage where it's a housing cooperative, a farming cooperative, they build roads. It's an amazing system. An amazing system. And the great thing about it is if you're a member of a cooperative, you pay your monthly rent or whatever it is, but at the end of the day you have a property you can pass on. So it gives you the best of both worlds, in my view. And I have tried myself. I know that the people that were with me in Dresden were all bankers. And the first thing they said at that briefing was, here's a model that would work in Ireland. Right? You bring together, if I could have a site in the morning, I have an architect, I need a builder. I don't want to make money out of it. What I do want...
We saw what happened before.
Absolutely. But these were people who looked at what was going on. And the bottom line...
Sorry, can we have the Senator to conclude shortly?
Do I have the floor, Chair? I do, for the moment. Right. The bottom line on it is, there are things that we should be looking at that we're not looking at. And I really urge you, Minister, to... I have tried to support yourself and Minister Murphy all along. I have said you cannot start a giant ship that was stalled in 5 minutes. It takes time. But I am getting very, very tired of the promises. I really get distressed at looking at people that can afford to pay a mortgage who can't raise the mortgage. I also, talking about the banks, I have personal, within my own family, one who will lose her house to a bank purely because the equity in the house was taken by a partner and the partner disappeared with the money in his pocket. And what do? They go after the asset, not the money. You know, so don't talk to me about bankers. I could talk from now till Christmas. Minister, I just want to draw your attention to the red tape issue that was brought up in Dublin City Council there recently. Under the current process, local authorities seeking to build social housing worth more than 2 million must go through a 4-stage process with the Department of Housing known as the cost effectiveness analysis. This includes the approval for the design expenditure, approval to proceed with planning, approval to proceed to tender, and approval of the tender window. The target time for the completion of the process of this is 59 weeks. 59 weeks. According to the Department of Housing, its approach process accounted for 15 weeks of the 59 weeks time frame and for getting social housing construction underway. It was reported that Dublin City Council had hired a panel of suitable consultants to assist their staff in compiling these reports. Fianna Fáil, for its part, have stated that they want a threshold raised from 2 million to 6 million, a measure which, according to the Minister for Housing, would save 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks, we're still talking about a year to get it through the system. I could go on and read this, but look, I know you've got more access to that than I have. I look at the site out in Shangana. How long is it there now? 15 years? I look at the site in Cherrywood. How long is it there? Lying there. You know, for God's sake, there are people out there who have systems that they can put in place, that can rapid build houses. Rapid build houses, I'm told, are taking a year. I brought you to see a system over...
Senator, please.
Okay. I brought you to see a system where they can build a house in a couple of months, finished outright. Can we please change the thinking? I know you're trying to do some good.
Nothing's stopping that being used.
You know?
And I'm trying to chair this place effectively.
I'll leave it at that, Chair.